come to mum and dad's for a couple of nights, and then ended up calling the ambulance. They come and checked on me, and then took me into hospital, and it all just happened really quick. Next minute, I was just waking up. Yeah, didn't really know where I was. Just laying there, and I couldn't really talk. And it was like a loop was going on. I could see these nurses. Well, I didn't know they were nurses. I just thought they were aliens in blue outfits or something. It was weird. The first thing I asked was, "Am I dead?" Because I think the last thing a nurse said to me was, "This is a serious issue, like life-threatening." Then mum and dad were there, and mum started crying.
When it's so close to home, it was a real eye-opener and sort of a little bit scary. Your normally fit, healthy son who hadn't been well for a couple of days and admitted through emergency and told he had pneumonia. Well, loads of people get pneumonia, treated 3 or 4 days and they're out of hospital, and that's what we thought initially. And then to get woken in the middle of the night with a call to say that he had deteriorated and was being taken to ICU so we could be closely observed, and they mentioned likelihood of survival rates, and you hear survival rates and you're like, what? They were going to contact us if they were going to put him on the ventilator, and you're laying in bed thinking, he's holding his own, that's great. And then to get that other call at 4:45 in the morning to say that he'd been placed on the ventilator and was heavily sedated, it was just so surreal. It was just like, how can this be?
That's great to hear from Rhys and Corley. I'm now going to pass you over to our friend and colleague Michael Hornby from the Prince Charles and the Common Good. Michael, he's been a huge asset to us as we've done this for the whole way through. Michael Hornby, please.
Thanks, John. It's a privilege to be here, and it's nice to sort of see Reneen and Fletch. Good to see you guys again, and obviously Beck being involved today. And I guess it was appropriate, and it feels organized, and I'm very emotional about this because it's not very often where you have the privilege to work for a charity that supports these wonderful initiatives and work with staff who are there every single day to help save and improve the quality of life. So to everyone in ICU first, I want to show my respect and say thank you so much. And most critically, that young man you saw there and that lady you saw there is actually my wife and my son, who in April of 2020, Rhys, out of the blue, got a bacterial pneumonia, and within a few hours he was in our emergency department at 11 o'clock at night. We got a phone call to say he's got a reasonable chance of survival, which we're not prepared for that. It was very difficult to deal with. So for a couple of years prior to that, I was working with John and Stein and the team on helping to raise funds for this ICU of the future. And you can imagine from my perspective that all of a sudden we were going to be the beneficiary of an ICU experience. And so I got to see firsthand what was going through, and I was conscious the whole time my son was there, and I didn't have those private moments, and the noise and the stress and the wonderful work of the ICU staff all came to reality for me. So rather than being just a wonderful project to support, I was very much in and amongst it all. So again, thank you. And what I can happily report for those of you who are interested is he is now a father. Our grandchild, Hayley, was born 2 months ago. So, one life saved and another life made as a result. So to the ICU team there, thank you so much. And it's a real privilege today to speak to one of my friends who's got involved with the foundation from the worst possible experience, and that's Beck Craven. Beck has not only become an ambassador for the common good, she's also been busily fundraising by riding a jazzy push bike on a cycle ride to help us raise some funds and hitting up friends and family. So when you're involved in this stuff through the common good and the work that you guys do, it's, once you're in, and it's a lifelong commitment. So Beck, can I just welcome you? Thank you so much for always being available for us to share your story. And can I just start by just asking about, from you, how long were you in ICU?
So I've been in ICU twice now. So I was there for my LVAD and I was there for my transplant, and both times were around a month or two, I guess, a month each time. So I've probably spent quite a few months in ICU all up.
And
yeah,
what
with
do you
everything.
do you remember most about that experience?
What don't I mean, it was probably one of the biggest things in my memory of my whole journey, actually. And that's purely because it's the most critical time, but it's also the most scariest. And for me personally, it's just little things like, you know, the lights not never turning off, and the sounds, and constantly thinking that people around you are dying, and, you know, looking at four walls and things. It's actually probably the one thing that's mentally taken longer for me to heal from. If I have to say anything has taken any time to heal, it's probably more so from the ICU stay.
I remember when you were telling your story and you were saying the continual alarms that were going off, and how even to this day you're very conscious of noises or alarms going off or sprinkler systems.
Actually, I have to admit, I wasn't going to watch that video that you saw earlier. When I first saw that, it gave me a lot of PTSD, and I said to Stein, I'm like, I'm going to enter a little bit later because I don't want to watch the video. And I thought I was entering later, but I entered as soon as you started to play the video. And I saw like 2 seconds of it, and the sounds, like, that's how much it's bothered me, you know? And I only saw like 2 seconds of it. So
Well,
it's, yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot.
and the last thing we want to do is actually take you back to that time, which actually makes this very difficult. And I guess a thank you for your bravery and going through that. But it does highlight the point that an experience in ICU, for the fact that it saved you, that the memories last a long time, don't they?
Oh, I think I don't think they will ever go away. And I want to also say that while I've had not the best experience in ICU, and there are things that I've taken from that, and that's probably added to my PTSD, there have been a lot of great people that I've met in ICU, like the doctors and the nurses that looked after me and obviously saved my life. Like, I would not put anything else apart from me just saying thank you to those people, and being very grateful at a hard time looking after someone who's critically unwell. And I think I have an ICU booklet now that, you know, I'm able to go back and look at all those hard times and see how far I've come as well. So it is something that I've taken, and probably, you know, like you've just seen, I'm not very healed from it, but I am grateful for the experiences that I've had.
And on that, Beck, of all the things that you've experienced, and for us to all to learn from that, what sort of changes do you think would have the greatest impact?
I think, I mean, I've actually spoken to a few friends, just to see what their opinions of ICU are. And a lot of people haven't actually experienced ICU, which is why I wanted to ask them. And they've all said that ICU is obviously a place for people who are critically ill, and that the care that they have there is what needs to happen, obviously. But I said to them, okay, so what if you were awake in ICU for like over a month? Is there anything that you would feel like you need to change? And they all said, oh, okay, yeah, that's different. That's a different way of looking at it, because you just think of someone who in ICU, they are critically ill, and they're probably, you know, in a coma, or they're not awake, they're not alive enough to be speaking most of the time. But for someone like us, we were awake for like a month. We got to hear everything that was going on around you. You got to see everything that was going on around you. And I think if we didn't change like the whole of ICU, definitely little things like the sounds. I mean, the sounds are something that's so triggering to lots of patients who even just go into hospital, not even into ICU. It's a trigger point for people. And I think the sleep sleep is a huge part of healing, and that's really hard when there are constant noises and there's no night or day. It's just very much day. The lights don't really change. And I think also having the more stimulation, I guess, of instead of looking at 4 white walls all the time, like have something that can, you know, stimulate the brain a little bit more instead of it just letting it wander into nightmares and like delirium side of stuff where you genuinely think that people are trying to kill you. Like I thought that nurses were trying to kill me, and at some stages, like I know that I probably wasn't that nice to some of the nurses, and I really couldn't help it. Like I really thought that I was in danger. And but also just like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's also like so important because it's just little things that can change someone's stay dramatically.
I remember one of the other people that helped us through the planning stage, it was Colin Manderson. He always tells the story that the biggest impact on him was he felt like he was bound the whole time in ICU because of the tubes appropriately and all the electrical sort of stuff. And he's such a character. He said the day he was he had all the tubes and he can get up and go to the bathroom for the first time was more important to him than his wedding day. So, it just shows the extremes there. But look, Beck, I just want to again thank you for your input, those insights you provided, and also the fact that you've been such a great ambassador for this project throughout. It's really been so important. And guys, just so you know, this is all being funded, you know, through public support, additional support, and through some opportunities that Stein and John have put applications towards. And we've generated just over $1 million worth of non-health funding to support this initiative, and you played an important role, Beck, and Jeff and Renina's as well, and sharing their stories have all contributed so importantly to all this. So again, Beck, thank you for your time today. I'm sorry you had to watch that video again. That wasn't the intent, and appreciate your contribution to help improve the quality of life of so many people as a result of all this.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful to be a part of this, honestly, and I think I want to keep continue on trying to help and trying to push this project because I do genuinely think it needs to change.
Thanks, Beck. This is my final piece, so I'll throw back to John, if I can say, and this is probably more from standing on a pulpit, I suppose, but I think the opportunity out of all this, from the way the foundation sees this and the public that we turn to, is it's not often you can be part of something of such innovation in such an important area, and with what's happened to the world over the past 2 or 3 years, the ICU has never been more relevant in the population's life. So if we can play a role to improve it by 20%, let's say, by providing a more calming, peaceful space as much as possible, it'll be a game changer. And for us to be part of this, which could influence global attitudes into this area, and so that no longer will, you know, the survival of people being absolutely critical of what it's all about, but to know that people can recover even better and perhaps get out a little bit earlier, but also along the way make the environment even a little bit more pleasant from the heroes like yourselves who give your lives to saving the lives of others. So I hope this is a moment for all of us.
Michael and Beck, thanks very much. Again, as Beck says, it's only through the great work of the intensive care and the surgical team that she's there to tell the story. She's also very modest. She's won a whole pile of medals as well. She does modelling, so she's making use out of every breath she's got. But we have left her with some long-term sequelae, and that's what it's about, making it better, not just for the patient, but also for the relatives. So I'm going to swing across now over to Roneen and Jeff Fletcher. Many of you will know them and remember Jeff's time in the intensive care. But before, I'll just summarise that Jeff is a Kiwi, but despite that, we decided we'd help him out. He's had heart failure back from 2010, 2014, had a defib, was going to go to New Zealand. On the early June 2016, went in for an echo, and his echo was appalling. It was about an ejection fraction of 5%. He was still standing upright, and he came in on the 1st of July to ICU, where Bruce Thompson, David, myself, and the rest of the team intubated him, put lines in, put tubes in. Over the next month or two, he went on to ECMO, he went on to VADs, BiVADs. The RVAD failed, was replaced, and then went home with BiVADs, came back in, was transplanted. And, you know, again, like Beck, great testimony to the surgical and ICU, the multidisciplinary team of Prince Charles that makes us Australia's leading cardiac hospital. But I thought rather than talking just to patients, we'd talk to Roneen, the relative, because the relative is the one that remembers everything. Again, the patient has these horrible flashbacks, but it really impacts. So Roneen, thanks for chatting to us this morning. I guess if we can just cast your mind back to the day that you were told you're going to have to leave the Royal Brisbane and come over to Prince Charles. I remember it in the middle of the evening. What were your thoughts as you're arriving in the intensive care? Did you ever think you were going to get this man to New Zealand?
No. Well, I guess when they decided it was, they came down and said he's very sick. I just thought he was moaning and groaning, and they said he'd be in for 5 days. So driving up Gympie Road and had the ambulance go past you, it was very overwhelming. And then I'll be honest, it was, I think, David Platts, John, and also Bruce Thompson. I'll make you laugh. I couldn't understand a word John said, but it was like it was pretty bad. And I guess from there, it was, I'd always had kept very positive about it. I didn't realise the extent of how bad he actually was, of when you actually did take him in to ICU. That ICU stint, 5 days, ended up being 5.5 months. So it was a very long road, and also being in that ICU, it was a biggest wake-up call for even myself. It was things that I was not expecting at all.
So before we talk about, you know, how Jeff got on in the intensive care, what did it feel like to you as a relative in the intensive care? I mean, obviously, great staff that you and Beck have all talked about, trying to make it good. What were the things as you got into that place, other than the fact that your husband was critically ill? What were the things that kind of sprung to mind to you the first time you get into that unit?
Okay, the first thing I went into that unit, you walk in, and I guess this is after day one, and you've got your husband there on ECMO, on dialysis. They called it a Christmas tree. I've never seen so much equipment around a person and think, how can this person ever survive? What's actually going on here? I have to say, even Jay Cherie, who's on today, did look after Jeff over that 5-month period as well. And I guess from being a relative, people like that really dumbed it down. You guys talk in your language, which means gobbledygoo to the actual families, but to actually write things down and actually speak in black and white instead of in colour when alarms were going off. Don't worry. First thing, why is this happening? What's happening? What's happening? It's okay. It's just this. It's this. So they would actually reassure you all the time. But again, it was very much, it was the overwhelming sensation through it all, thinking how's he ever going to survive this, and how's he going to come out the other end?
So as we know, that was a pretty long journey, Jeff, coming out the other end. He made you work for it. When he started getting better and we started taking the breathing tube out and you got a chance to chat to Jeff again, what was he like? He probably can't remember all of that at that time. What was he like in terms of before he went in?
He was very, he wouldn't believe a lot of things. And he'd be trying to tell me things that, as he'd tell me that the terrorists were back in there last night, trying to shoot everyone. He felt like ducking. There was nowhere to actually go. Telling me the blue spaghetti monster was actually coming to get him, which was just pretty much a drive line going in. And then there was another one who was adamant that although we are Australians, we're not Kiwis, we were going to New Zealand. And he was sure that he was in ICU in a backyard in New Zealand eating red jelly. And to him, it was like so real. The terrorist was actually a trolley that had a bung wheel. So as soon as that trolley was moving, he was like ducking and actually going for cover.
It's amazing something so simple as a trolley can really freak someone out whilst they're sitting on ECMO or BiVADs, but the one thing that's making them really worried is not the fact that their heart's not working or the fact that they're attached to more medical equipment than you can imagine, but it was a trolley and it just set off, like Beck said, the noise has just set something off inside this brain that was all a bit confused.
Yeah. The other thing that he did very much struggle with, and having photos of it as well, he was like holding his own press conference, and every single morning with like 10 to 12 doctors all sitting there talking about him. He had a breathing tube in, so he actually couldn't speak, but he has got a set of ears and could hear absolutely everything that was being said at the time. So, of course, he actually thinks the worst, where that's very overwhelming and daunting, not even just for him, but also for family members that were in there when that was happening.
I remember a photograph Jeff's given a number of us. It's taken from his breakfast tray, and it looks to this panoramic view of the intensivist, the surgeon, the nurse, the physio, the dietitian, the OT, the speechy. It was very much like being inside John Malkovich. Is the great film. So you know, it was a very, very long road, as we've said, and I summarised 5 months very poorly, I'm certain. He got home, and again, as you've always said, great testament to the ICU and the surgical teams, etc. His heart works. You know, is he back to normal?
And I guess, okay, this is where it gets really, really hard. Okay, it has been 5 years, and you think, as Beck said, the video as well, yeah, it hit a lot of nerves. He had to actually walk out when that was playing. The heart's great. The heart's really, really good, but the head is so broken. The PTSD, the long-term effects, like even being in a pet barn store and there was a dog with a high bark, it actually set him off into a complete spin because it reminded me of him alarms actually going off in ICU. And I remember you telling us, John, even once that returned Vietnam vets, ICU patients, their PTSD can actually even be worse. So if I would say to Jeff, we're leaving now, no, he can't deal. He'll have a complete meltdown. But if I said to him, we're leaving at 12:45, he has time to actually get that into his head and actually work out, yep, I can actually do this. So although the heart's good, it is still very hard dealing with the panic attacks. But also, I think because of he had what, 7, 8 open sternums, 9 cardiac arrests. His memory loss is also very bad. So I do need to write things down. Or if he says I told him that, I just deny it anyway. So, but again, it's very much, it's hard. It is still a long road. So yeah.
Thanks for that, and please feel free to not answer if any of these make you feel uncomfortable. That's hard for Jeff, but it's also very hard for you, Reneen. That's not just affected Jeff. I think you know, in terms of your work or Jeff's work, is that back to normal?
Jeff's still not back at work. Even the anxiety, if he was to go to work to get into a car, he could drive down the road, but as soon as there's any sort of major traffic or delays, either say Bruce Highway or Gympie Road, he feels like everything is coming in on top of him and has a panic attack. His electric scooter has been his life, where he can actually scooter around and actually get out. So that's for him. For me, I've also been very fortunate that I do work from home. So we do actually have that advantage that we can actually do the both. But again, on any marriage, being at home together 24/7 for a whole year, mate, there's times
5 years.
Well, yeah, what did I say? 25. Yeah, it takes its toll. Like not only on your marriage, on your friendship, like just absolutely everything. It is still hard, and seeing psychiatrists, and we're trying to get there, but it's still, it just seems like it's never ending.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the ICU, you know, you've helped us with the concepts, and what we've tried to do from the ICU, the future, is build it, not as we say, but the architect, builder, and CEO, but more with the patient and the relative at the centre focus. You know, if there's things obviously outstanding that, you know, despite all those VADs, transplants, and sternotomies, you're still alive, Jeff. what would be the one or two things that you'd like to see from the intensive care that you think, if there was one or two things we could try and achieve through this, what would they be?
I think even from that is, even for a patient, and Beck may remember this as well, there is so much behind the patient's head, and they've got so no control of what they can see, of what's going on behind them, but also the amount of alarms that are going off. Like, you're laying on that, in that bed, and all you're doing is looking at the ceiling. And I know some of the ICU staff, what they did was get me to get photos of one lot of like family and one of friends, and we laminated it and actually put it on the roof in ICU, so he could actually see something. But to have a future where, as Beck said also, every day is daytime. 3 a.m. in the morning, it's daytime. The lights are bright. So being able to dim rooms, change the actual lighting, even projections up onto, okay, maybe not on a beach or something, but just like different actually things, so they're not just looking at a ceiling. And the main thing is the amount of alarms, and yeah.
Again, Michael reminded us of what Colin was saying when we met with the builders right way back, and Colin said, you know, day after day he'd wake up and the only thing he had to do to keep his mind occupied was join the dots on the roof, and he'd give himself a pattern, and he'd try and find that pattern within the dots on the roof. And it doesn't sound like medically that important, but there's nothing worse than having absolutely nothing to do, particularly when you're sleep deprived and you're going to be there for another month.
Yep, absolutely.
Good. Well, listen, thanks for both of you, and Fletch, thank you as well for staying. I'm sorry again that video did cause some stramash to both of you, but I think it does summarise that is how you guys see it. It's not overly dramatic. It's built from what you people have told us.
It's bang on, and I really did struggle with that. That was bang on and too close, way too close.
Yeah. So it is way too close, and the hope is that we are going to be able to make this better.
Thanks, John and Tami and Michael, but especially Beck, Roneen and Jeff as well. Just a quick warning, I suppose. This presentation does have a few images from ICU. So for Beck, Roneen and Jeff, just letting you know that's coming up in the next 10 minutes or so. So I'm just going to do a very quick summary of the project, background, what we're trying to achieve, why, what we're up to, what the plans are, timeline, those sort of things. So a lot of this has already been summarized. It is a fairly large problem. We know that in Australia, approximately 150,000 patients per year are admitted to ICU, which means that approximately 50% of all Australians will either end up in ICU as a patient or have a family member or close friend in an ICU. It's not cheap. The costs are somewhere between $5,000 to $6,000 per day per patient. And as mentioned earlier, the vast majority of people survive. So the survival rate is excellent. It's the quality of survival that's not always optimal. We know a lot of patients experience delirium. The number varies, but some talk about up to 80% of mechanically ventilated patients experiencing it. But as we've heard, the ongoing and permanent problems that's associated with ICU is large. Large number of patients experiencing PTSD, cognitive impairment, short-term and sometimes longer-term or permanent. Other psychological problems, depression, anxiety are very high. We talked about the ability to return to work, and we talked about family members also being affected by the traumatic experience, but also by having to provide ongoing care afterwards. And we know that ICU delirium is associated with some significant negative sequelae. We know that you're more likely to die in ICU, and after your ICU admission, if you get delirium, we know that people are likely to require longer duration of mechanical ventilation, stay longer in ICU and hospital, more likely to have cognitive impairment, and more likely to experience PTSD. So obviously it's also therefore more costly for the society and for the hospitals. So we talked a lot about patients, but as John mentioned, this project is also about improving how we provide care, so helping staff provide better care as well. We know that the current environment impacts on staff health. We know that staff can leave work in ICU tired, fatigued, get stress or tension headaches. This has all been documented in the literature, especially around the noise and the lack of external views. And as John mentioned, we also know that workplace violence, unfortunately, is very common in ICU. And if you look at the literature, up to 99% of ICU nurses have experienced violence at some point in their career. And in an informal survey done here at the Prince Charles Hospital, that backs it up. The majority of staff had previously been exposed to occupational violence, either verbal aggression or physical. We've also explored this at a different Metro North ICU, and all staff interviewed reported witnessing and or being personally subjected to physical or verbal aggression while working at their ICU. So we know that this is very common, unfortunately. It's becoming normalized and expected, so it's not really reported particularly well, but it does impact significantly on both patients, family members, but also staff especially. So we know that hopefully if we can start reducing the incidence of delirium, we will have good patient outcomes, better patient outcomes, but also improve it for staff. We know that ICU can be quite traumatic for patients. It's different, they perceive it differently to how staff perceive it. After interviewing staff and many patients, they will tell a very similar story. As staff members, we know that ICU can be busy and stressful, but it's a safe workplace. But a lot of our patients talk about a sinister or traumatic or scary environment that creates a lot of fear. And some of these are ongoing, as you've heard. It's important that, both Beck and Roneen talked about this. The patients are all telling us that the care provided is excellent and empathetic. There's been no issue raised with this. We know that the care provided is as good as it gets, and all patients are grateful to be alive. But when you start digging a bit further, that's when you start hearing some of these stories that Roneen, Jeff, and Beck have kindly shared. Some of the key problems that the patients experience as well as staff experience have helped us identify, and that we're trying to address as part of this project includes, as you've heard, it's a very, very noisy environment. There's a lack of natural daylight in many of the bed spaces, either because the internal have no window, or alternatively because the windows are behind the patient, so the patients can't access them. So therefore, it's artificial light, and there's limited difference at times between night and day. And I think both Beck and Ronnie talked about sleep deprivation, which is very, very common in ICU, which is linked with the loss of circadian rhythms, which is again linked with delirium. A lot of patients talked about, and family members as well, having a limited understanding of what was happening to them, their diseases, what all the equipment were, what all the alarms meant, and the inability to communicate some of their wishes was also raised. We know that some of the ICU technology can be a little bit outdated. Patients talked about a lack of autonomy and the bland, boring or sterile environment with white or creamy white walls, and an inability to personalize the environment. The environment is static, and it's the same for all patients regardless of their needs and regardless of their changing needs, because we know needs change from when they're critically unwell and sedated versus when they're in the rehab phase. So to highlight a couple of these things, so how noisy is the average ICU? According to the literature, and we've done studies at Charlie's, which is basically, it's same here as in all other reported ICUs. The average sits at about 60 to 65 decibel, which is similar to putting the bed right next to a busy freeway, which is not really a concern if the noise level is constant, because when you jump on a plane, the hum of the engine is annoying, but you get used to it. The key problem is that there's multiple peaks that are very, very high, over 90 to 100 decibels, and most of them come from alarms. Not a lot of difference between day and night, slightly quieter, but still the same issue with lots of peak sounds happening all the time. And if you look at the peak sounds, they're actually very similar to power tools being used 10 to 15 meters away from the patients when they go off, because all the alarms and all the noise, unfortunately, is happening right next to the patient's head. So as you can see here, these are some of the equipment, and they're all within the meter of the patient's head. And all of these create mechanical noise, but also alarms. And there's a few other as well surrounding the patients. So we decided to do an audit on the alarms at Charlie's, just to get a baseline and a better understanding of what the problem is. So we did it for the month of October in 2019. There were 600,000 alarms, and this is from one piece of equipment only. So this was only from the monitors, because it's much easier to get the data from them, which equates to 1,000 alarms per bed per day, or each monitor creating a new alarm every 80 seconds or so. So it goes off a lot. 80 seconds, a new alarm starts, no difference between 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. It was fairly constant day and night. And that's all well and good if all of those alarms are critical and needs to be actioned. But when we looked at how many of those alarms were actually actioned, unfortunately only 5% were actioned, and the other 95% were ignored or potentially unnecessary alarms. So they weren't actioned. And I suppose we've known that noise is an issue in ICU for quite a while, but we haven't really addressed it, unfortunately. And this is a common problem around the world. Very briefly on light, we know that light is essential for synchronizing our body clock, so to maintain our circadian rhythms. And we know that most ICU patients lose the circadian rhythms very, very quickly. It's not just the, I guess, the intensity of the light. We know that the intensity during the day is not enough to entrain your circadian rhythms, but we also know that at nighttime it's too bright, so people start losing the circadian rhythms because of that. There's also the timing of it, and also the color temperature. We know that we've evolved around the sun rising, getting gradually brighter in the morning, more blue light in the morning stimulate wakefulness, and less blue light at night helping you fall asleep. But in the ICU, all of that is fairly constant, and there's actually a lot of blue lights being emitted from monitors, etc. And lack of natural light and views was one of the key things that pretty much all patients identified as one of the key concerns they had. And as mentioned, it heavily impacts on the patient's sleep. They sleep on average 3 to 5 hours per day, so that's over a 24-hour period. And if you spend a lot of time in ICU, generally your sleep-wake cycle is completely lost or reversed. So a lot of times they sleep more during the day, or approximately 50-50. Some studies talk about a median duration of unbroken sleep being 5 to 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes or so, you get woken up by something, whether it's an alarm or staff talking, the phone ringing, whatever, and then you try to go back to sleep again, but you're always in that light sleep phase. So we talked about obviously number of alarms, but we also know a lot of patient care activities per night. Again, a lot of them essential, but maybe not all of them. Some of them might just be following a tick sheet. Again, decreased sleep is linked with mortality and ongoing mental, physical, and cognitive problems. So I guess, how can we address these things? And there's obviously a lot of things we can't change. We can't change how unwell our patients are. We can't change a lot of these things, but we can actually change the physical environment we put the patient into. And we can change it to make sure that we actually address the key issues that the patients have raised, patient and family members. So we've done a co-design process where we had clinicians, researchers, industry partners, and put them in the same room as some of our patients. We got Beck here as one of the patients who attended. So we can all hear the same story and we can all develop problems around it. They've gone through various design iterations, and we've been assigned a couple of bed spaces in our current ICU that we will upgrade. So we'll be beds 19 and 20. The 2 current simulation bed spaces. We're currently working with the builders and the architects and coming up with the ideal solution for them, because we need to retrofit and fit it in within current walls, etc. So these are some of the early drawings, and hopefully the architectural drawings will be finalized in the next 2 to 4 weeks. So there's the design side of things, and then there's the technology, and we know that technological progress is happening very quickly. We're moving from the current situation towards a more quiet and eventually potentially a silent ICU. And by silent, it doesn't mean that everything is completely dead silent. It just means that the alarms going off next to the patient's head currently will be moved, so there will be more silence around the patient themselves. We know that technology exists where we can actually integrate all the monitors, ventilators, infusion devices, send the information directly to the caregiver. We know we can send alarms, a lot of the alarms away from the patient, again, send it directly to the caregiver. And just by moving the monitors 4 meters away from the patients, we can reduce the noise level at the patient's head by about 7 to 10 decibel, which is a halving of how they perceive the sound. We know that the number of alarms at Charlie's is very, very high, as it is around the world. But we worked with Philips to come up with a plan how we can just do some simple reconfiguration of the monitors. And we're confident that we can reduce the number of alarms by 50% just by doing some targeted changes to address the issues that we identified in the audit. So we've been working with the ICU staff and the nurses, and this will be implemented from the end of this month. And there's information that will be provided to all the staff. There will be donor lighting solutions, there will be patient engagement on virtual visiting, ways to stimulate the patient, keep them more engaged, as well as the family members. Lots of other solutions. I won't go through them here, but the key thing is they've all been developed around the needs of the patients. I'm going to wrap it up now. There's lots of work happening in the design of the actual bed spaces, and we do need everyone's input, so please have a think about all of these things and come and talk to us and let us know what your thoughts are. But there's also ongoing work on how we can evaluate these and continually improve this. So if anyone is interested in this, please get in touch.